The black is the data, the red is the model. This is time along this axis, so we're moving time, and this is the amplitude of the tide. And normally the tides oscillate about every 12 hours, but in this case they're oscillating about every 10 minutes, because that's the tsunami signal. But the first 10 were the largest. And again, the first one wasn't the largest. The 1, 2, 3, 4. The fifth and sixth waves were the largest.
And they were how many inches high, roughly?
10 inches.
10 inches. The warning went out and people heeded the warning.
Yes.
I think one of the questions that I have for you is, obviously, earthquakes certainly capable of generating a tsunami. Yeah. Just happens to be the geology. Let's talk about that for a second. What about the geology here that was different, that did not give us a tsunami, even though the quake was certainly large?
Well, in the area of Alaska where this earthquake occurred, there's a large subduction zone. Right. And that means the plate is overlying and driving underneath the Alaska plate. So in this case, the earthquake occurred on the oceanic plate, and it was a strike slip, which means it's horizontal motion. But even though it's horizontal motion, you can push the water such that it generates a tsunami. And what we have from this kind of strike slip is a fairly large tsunami. The fact that it was 20 centimeters in Crescent City, some distance away, some 2,000 miles away, tells you it's a pretty powerful tsunami, except that it was strike slip. So most of the energy went into the horizontal component, not the vertical component.
You don't like false alarms, and this was not a false alarm. But it was a case where people might go, I got up in the middle of the night, I got in my car, I went to higher ground for nothing. Yeah. What do you say to those folks?
Well, let's separate the problem in two parts. Part one was people close enough to the earthquake that they felt it. Okay, now that's an indication. If you can feel it in the middle of the night, you probably should take warning and evacuate. Now, true, this is an inconvenience, but under the circumstances and our knowledge base about what was going on was limited at that time, that was a prudent thing to do. But for people who live in Crescent City, who live on our coastline in Washington, Oregon, those dark buoys determined that it was a very small tsunami. So there was no need to evacuate people on our coastline. So that's where the distinction takes place. It's sort of, if you're close enough to feel the earthquake, in most cases you should evacuate, just as a precautionary measure. Now, this is an inconvenience, admittedly, but it doesn't happen every month. It happens about every 5 or 6 years. So to live in Kodiak or live in Alaska, and every 5 or 6 years you have to get up in the middle of the night, granted it's not perfect, but it's the safe thing to do. In this case, there was a real tsunami. We just didn't know at the beginning stages how big it would be. But once the first DART data started coming in, we knew it was going to be small. So we knew immediately what we were dealing with, and everybody did what they were supposed to do. They took appropriate actions. Now, if that had been 200 miles to the west on a subduction zone, we would be experiencing a lot of flooding on our coastline right now, because it would have been a big tsunami.